Quiet your breath. A single act inside the Shogun's palace changed everything. It was 1701. Asano Naganori, a young lord expected to keep his composure, drew a short blade where no blade should be drawn. In an instant he was stripped of rank, ordered to end his own life, and his household dissolved into shame. That public humiliation became a wound that would not heal. 4 to 7 men called themselves retainers. The law named them masterless. The world called them defeated. For 2 years they traded their armor for common work and practice. They accepted insults they did not deserve. They let people think they had lost their pride. All the while, they kept a secret. They were counting days, mapping routines, learning every small thing that would let them strike at one man, the man they blamed for their lord's fall. Why wait? Why hide? Because revenge in their world carried a cost far beyond a single life. It would test the meaning of duty. It would force the rulers to choose between order and mercy. It would ask, when the laws of a state punish honor, what answer remains to those who refuse oblivion? This story ends with a winter night, a quiet temple, and a sacrifice that divided a nation. Stay with me. If this grabs you, tap like to mark the start of the journey. Comment now. Would you give up everything to restore another's name? Subscribe to follow the full telling. We'll unpack every choice, every doubt, and the final moment that haunts Japan to this day. They were not strangers to ceremony. In spring 1701, imperial envoys from Kaito arrived in Edo, and Asano Naganori, a young daimyo from Ake, was assigned the delicate task of receiving them. To learn court ritual, he was meant to consult a senior official, Kira Yoshinaka, an expert in etiquette and protocol. Tension between the two men grew. Complaints, slights, gifts exchanged in unequal measure, until a moment inside the Shogun's palace ended everything. Asano drew his short sword in forbidden corridor. For that breach, the Bakufu punished him severely. He was ordered to commit seppuku. His lands were confiscated, and his household was dissolved. What followed was social death as much as legal ruin. The weapons went silent, and Asano's retainers were cast into margins as masterless samurai, Ronin. Their leader, Ishi Yoshio, did not answer with immediate violence. Instead, the men dispersed, took humble trades, and wore a public face of shame. That apparent surrender lasted 2 years. Behind that mask they watched, counted patterns, and quietly prepared. The delay was not cowardice but strategy. The plot required time and a world that would let the target lower his guard. On the night their patience reached an edge, they acted. In late January 1703, the band split into groups, scaled gates, overcame guards, and forced their way into Kira's residence. They found him, killed him, and, following the code that bound them to their lord, cut off his head and carried it through the city to Sengakuji, the temple where Asano was buried. The act stopped the city. Crowds lined the route, some cheering, others aghast. When the shogunate weighed the response, it faced a dilemma: punish the breach of public order, yet acknowledge the samurai code that had motivated it. The solution came as a grim compromise. Most of the attackers were ordered to die by ritual suicide. One man was later pardoned. Their graves at Sengakuji remain a place of remembrance to this day. If this clash between law and loyalty hooked you, think of a trusted leader stripped of dignity and those who refuse to let the name die. Tap like if you're still with me. Ask, comment, will you accept exile or fight to restore a fallen name? Subscribe to follow the full breakdown as we move into the strategy and human choices that made this vendetta unforgettable. He could have answered with immediate violence, a rash charge straight into the shogun's halls. He chose something quieter and harder, apparent surrender. After Asano's death, Ishi Yoshio stripped himself of public dignity. He took on the clothes and manner of a defeated man. He drank in public houses. He took work that would have been shameful for a samurai. He let gossip and ridicule follow him like a shadow. Outsiders wrote him off. That was part of his plan. This behavior was not collapse. It was calculation performed in plain sight. By becoming a man without honor in the city's eyes, Ishi blurred expectations. Guards relaxed. Informants grew careless. The house that had once mattered to the world receded from view. Meanwhile, the men who remained loyal to Asano moved through new roles that taught them useful lessons. One former retainer learned the rhythm of market days, so he could time movements without raising suspicion. Another worked near the magistrate's quarters and noted which patrols favored certain routes. These small occupations became intelligence gathering disguised as survival. They also used the time to recruit carefully. Not every former retainer could be trusted with a plan that would end in death. Meetings happened behind closed doors, in the back rooms of tea houses and in the homes of sympathetic neighbors. They assessed who could keep a secret, who could climb walls in the dark, who could hold a blade under pressure. Weapons were acquired with patience. Short blades hidden inside ordinary tools, drills practiced in the thud and silence of the night. Maps were sketched from memory and refined with repeated observation. Every route to Kira's residence was traced, then retraced until the steps felt like second nature. The delay tested them in ways that had nothing to do with tactics. Families fretted. Wives and children faced loss of status and means. Some retainers argued the plan with cruelty, that dragging the household through years of uncertainty might break the living more than avenge the dead. Others insisted that haste would invite disaster. These debates were not background noise. They were the raw sound of conscience. The men kept returning to a single question: would a failed attack render their sacrifice meaningless, or would careful timing make the sacrifice honorable? Ishias' leadership showed in small habits. He practiced patience without losing resolve. He wrote letters that concealed true intent in ordinary phrasing. He accepted humiliation as a tool rather than a punishment. When spies drifted close, he played the part of the broken samurai so convincingly they reported nothing useful. When friends slipped into despair, he held the line with quiet reminders of the oath they had sworn to their dead lord. When it came time to act, the 2 years of seeming defeat revealed themselves as preparation so complete it felt inevitable. The men knew routes, guard shifts, how to move without waking a sleeping street. Their bodies carried the memory of the plan as surely as their minds did. The patience that had once looked like cowardice now read as precision. Whatever one's judgment about their choice, the result was not a rash, desperate strike, but the execution of a long, carefully kept design. If the slow, purposeful grind of their plan grabbed you, think of someone you trust who's been publicly shamed, and of those who refuse to let their name vanish. Engage. Tap like if you want the full raid broken down step by step. Ask. Comment below. Was Ishias' patience masterful or morally wrong? Subscribe to follow the next section where the plan meets action, and we watch patience turn into consequence. They move like men who had rehearsed grief until it became a skill. The night of January 30th to 31st, 1703, was thin and cold in Edo. Ishii and his band split into teams with a single, wordless coordination. One group to the front, another to the rear. A drum and a whistle marked the attack. A plan that had been sketched in secret for 2 years now depended on speed and silence. They forced their way through gates and past guards. In the chaos of lantern light and shouted names, Kira's household fought back. Several of his samurai fell. In some accounts, Kira hid in an outhouse. In others, he tried to resist and was overwhelmed. When they found him, the attackers showed no mercy. Kira Yoshinaka was killed and decapitated. The head was washed and wrapped, not as an act of glee, but as a ritual offering to the man they had loved as lord. Then came the walk. The men carried proof of their deed through the waking city to Sengakuji, the temple where Sano Naganori's grave lay. Crowds gathered along the route. Some whispered approval. Others stared as if at a private madness that had stepped into daylight. At the temple, they laid Kira's head in their master's tomb, performed rites, and surrendered to the officials who had arrived to detain them. Their fate was now a matter of state judgment. The shogunate faced a dilemma that exposed a fault line in public life. These men had followed a code older than the Bakufu statutes. They had acted from loyalty. Yet they had done so by breaking the very peace the shogun was sworn to protect. Officials could not ignore the murder. Popular admiration for the Ionin complicated matters further, since petitions on their behalf reached Edo's magistrates. After deliberation, the rulers issued a grim compromise. The attackers would be punished, but allowed the samurai's death with ritual dignity. 4 to 6 of the 4 to 7 assailants were ordered to die by seppuku. One man, Terasuke Kichiman, remained alive, later pardoned and allowed to live out his years, eventually buried with his comrades. The executions themselves were public and swift. For many in the city, the scene fused sorrow with a complex admiration. Here were men who had acted from devotion. Here were men condemned for defying the state. The official sentence, ritual suicide rather than common execution, acknowledged, in a bitter way, the seriousness of their motive while affirming that no individual could be permitted to take the law into his own hands. Their bodies were interred at Sengakuji beside Asano's tomb, where for centuries offerings and prayers would mark a story that the people continued to visit, debate, and retell. Plays, puppet theater, woodblock prints, and later films made of the iron and icons of fidelity and sacrifice. The Chingura dramas reshaped names and scenes, polishing the narrative into a moral exemplar that suited each era's needs. The other path was historical scrutiny. Scholars have long debated the motives, the details of Kira's conduct, and whether the delay in design were justified by justice or corrupted by pride. Both paths live together, the shrine that draws pilgrims and the archives that hold disputed records. Listen closely to what this choice cost. These men did not simply attack a house. They rewired how society would remember loyalty. They paid with their lives so the name of one man would remain. The city granted them a strange kind of honor, and the state reclaimed its authority. The INNS action did not produce clear answers. It posed them, about when private duty becomes public crime, about the limits of obedience, and about how nations convert deeds into lessons. If the raid and its consequences gripped you, relate. Think about a moment when a small act demanded an enormous price from people who love someone. Tap like if you want the next section to compare the myth to the historical record. Ask, comment, did their act restore or destroy it? Subscribe to follow the deeper breakdown and the 5 moral lessons this story still teaches. Stories do something history cannot. They bind facts into meaning. The AK incident began as a concrete series of events, a violent revenge carried out on the night of January 30th to 31st, 1703, but it did not stay only in the records. That night, the INN carried Kira Yoshinaka's head to Sengakuji Temple and surrendered. The base sequence of deeds is straightforward. What followed was a slow folding of those deeds into drama, ritual, and then legend. Sengakuji itself became a living archive. Pilgrims and later tourists visit the grave still set before Asano's tomb. The temple preserved the armor, drum, and other artifacts associated with the men who acted. For many visitors, a site is not merely a memorial, but a place where a specific idea of loyalty can be touched and felt. That physical presence helped the story migrate from a legal incident to civic memory. Art and theater did the rest. Within years, dramatists adapted the events into plays under the name Chingura, a version that changed names and settings to get past censorship, then amplified character and motive in ways that fit each era's appetite. Puppet theater and kabuki polished scenes into moral set pieces. The humiliation in court, the long disguise of Ishii, the midnight raid, the final procession to the temple. Each retelling emphasized different virtues, devotion, sacrifice, or the tragic cost of pride, and in doing so the story acquired multiple, sometimes conflicting meanings. But the popular framing simplified details that remained debated. Was Kira merely a corrupt tutor who demanded bribes, or a strict official enforcing court practice? Sources differ, and later storytellers had reasons to paint him darker so the drama would read cleaner. Those choices matter. They tilt audience sympathy and make the INNS action seem either righteous retribution or reckless bloodletting. Good history holds both the retellings and the archival sources in view, showing how a narrative grows from facts and from the moral needs of each reteller. The state's response mixed punishment with a kind of acknowledgement. Officials could not allow private vendettas to become public precedent, yet they also recognized the cultural logic that motivated the INN. The sentence, ritual suicide for most, a pardon for one survivor, was a messy compromise that both reinforced authority and allowed space for honor. That paradox is central to why the tale endures. It frames a collision where society's rules and personal duty cannot be easily reconciled. Over 2 centuries, the incident seeded holidays, plays, books, and films. In AKO and in Tokyo, people still mark the events. Festivals and rituals ensure the story is retold each year. Contemporary creators continue to reshape the tale, sometimes to celebrate loyalty, sometimes to critique it, which keeps the incident alive rather than fossilized. This is history that breathes, a single event that invites continuous interpretation. What should a viewer take from the split between myth and record? First, understand that every retelling chooses what to highlight and what to soften. Second, notice how social needs shape memory. Communities adopt stories that reflect values they want to teach. Finally, accept that ambiguity can be productive. The AK incident forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. When does devotion become danger? When does law protect people? And when does it hide injustice? Those are not tidy questions, which is why the story still matters. If the tug between legend and history hooked you, relate. Think of a time when a public story felt simpler than the facts behind it. Engage. Tap like if you want a visual breakdown of how theater reshaped this event. Comment. Which version moves you more, the dramatic retelling or the archival record? Subscribe to continue. Next, we'll map the 5 moral lessons this tale forces us to face, and we'll script them for maximum emotional impact. The story of the 47 Iron-In is more than a single act. It is a mirror that throws back questions about the choices people make for one another. Below our 5 lessons, the tale still presses on us, each one drawn from a moment in the plot and shaped for a listener today. Loyalty without judgment becomes a risk. Ishii and his men kept faith with Asano to the last breath. Their devotion is almost unimaginable now. They practiced public shame to hide a plan. They accepted hunger and mockery, and they were willing to die for a name. That depth of faith can be beautiful. It can also demand actions that harm others or break social bonds. Ask today, when we follow leaders or causes, do we reserve the right to question? The Iron-In oath restored a name, but it also turned private grief into public violence. Patience can be strategy and also cruelty. The 2 years of apparent surrender were a masterclass in delayed action. Ishii's waiting let guards relax and made the raid possible. Yet that same delay stretched suffering for families and allies who bore the cost in everyday life. Patience sharpened their success. It prolonged the pain for those who did not choose it. In modern terms, long-game tactics can win victories, but leaders must weigh collateral human cost. Law and moral feeling do not always match. The shogunate punished the Iron-In for murder while still allowing them the ritual of seppuku, a compromise that acknowledged motive but defended public order. The state could not let private revenge set a precedent, even as the public admired the act. That tension is familiar now. A community may lionize someone who breaks rules for a cause. Which matters more, the rulebook or the impulse we call right? The verdict at Sengaku-ji made both answers visible. Stories shape memory more than facts do. From plays to film, Chingura polished the episode into morality play, heroes and villains simplified for drama. Over time, the retellings hardened into an ideal of fidelity that often obscures complexity. Whether Kira was corrupt or simply a strict court official is debated. Remember, the stories we re-repeat teach values more than they teach nuance. Hold both the theater and the archive in view. Acts meant to restore dignity can remake a culture. The Iron-In march with Kira's head to Asano's grave created a public image so powerful it shaped rituals, pilgrimage, and national drama for centuries. People still visit Sengaku-ji to see the graves and artifacts. The event continues to be reinterpreted across media and generations. The lesson, a single decisive choice can echo through institutions and popular imagination for centuries. Choose carefully. If these lessons landed, like the steady beat of a drum, relate. Think of someone you defend. Will you stop to ask what defending costs others? Engage. Tap like if you want short narrated vignettes for each lesson that you could use as chapter hooks. Ask, comment, which lesson hits you hardest? Subscribe to follow the full script where we turn these lessons into scenes you can record and edit to maximize watch time.